building on greenbelt, then 50% must be affordable housing and also increase access to green spaces. So there is a protection built in there, isn't there?
There is, if that works, but we've been trying as authorities to get affordable housing built in North London for well over a decade. If you take the targets I have in Wiltshire, they're for either 30 or 40% affordable housing, depending on the viability of where we are in the county and house prices. But we end up delivering about, on average, 20% affordable housing because developers aren't giving them all these extra costs, unexpected problems that mean they're constantly arguing that viability statement. The idea that government, unless they change the rules on viability, which they're not proposing doing, will force developers to build 50% affordable housing. You might do that, but you won't get any other infrastructure at all with it.
Given where we are, we need a lot more housing. The government says this is what we're going to do. What would you do?
I think there are two critical points. Firstly, we don't see enough redevelopment and better use of land in cities. People want to live in cities. Personally, I don't understand that. I love living in a village.
With respect, though, that sounds like you're saying don't build it here in lovely Wiltshire, go and build it in a city somewhere else.
I think there's half in, so let me come on to the second point. So we need to come up with a better way of using existing brownfield land and redeveloping in urban areas. That also applies in the market towns like in Wiltshire. It's very hard to get a brownfield site developed because of costs and we're back to that viability argument. I think if we're going to see brownfields being built, we need a model which goes to the making, which means the owner of the land gets a small uplift, better than agricultural value, but a small uplift. And then the rest of the value that is being released from land goes to authorities to make sure that we can ensure that infrastructure is delivered through the process. If we have to build reforms, I think there's a pretty strong argument we also need to look at about whether we should be building particularly investing in agricultural land.
That's it from us. I'm Charlotte Smith. The producer is Rebecca Rooney. And today is a BBC Audio Bristol production.
It's marketed for babies. It's about to be makeup, but they could be talent.
We as lawyers are becoming aware of the fact that asbestos has been found in talcum powder.
This is the story of the tactics the talc industry can use to cast doubt over science and keep their product on the shelves.
The industry ran a campaign that really took some lessons from the tobacco playbook.
How they made us doubt everything. Series 2, Talc Tales. With me, Phoebe Myers. Next Monday to Friday at 1:45 and 8:04 on BBC Sounds.
And this is BBC Radio 4. It's 6 o'clock, Friday the 2nd of August. Good morning, this is Claire with the headlines this morning. The US and Russia have completed the biggest prisoner swap since the fall of the Soviet Union. Just over an hour ago, President Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris greeted 3 of the freed prisoners as they touched down on American soil.
This is about the essence of who we are as a country. It really is about personal initiative, it's about families, it's about being able to have access to the people you love and you adore.
Included the Wall Street Journal reporter Evan Gershkovich, talking to his editor, the former Sunday Times editor Emma Tucker, who was there with Evan's family to welcome him back.
The other main headlines this morning: the Culture Secretary has raised concerns about the BBC's handling of its investigation into Hugh Edwards, and Sir Andy Murray has bowed out of professional tennis as his illustrious career ended with defeat in the Olympic men's doubles quarterfinals.
I gave as much as I could to the sport. I loved competing in the Olympic Games and competing for my country. It's been, these weeks are so special, and I'll definitely, miss them.
We'll look at the legacy of one of Britain's biggest sports stars with a close friend and a former coach. BBC News is read this morning by Alan Smith.
President Biden has said trust was behind the largest prisoner swap between the West and Russia since the Cold War. 26 people, including 2 children from 6 different countries, travelled home overnight after an exchange in Turkey. British-Russian Vladimir Karabuzov was among those freed and sent to Germany. In the last few hours, 3 US citizens landed in Maryland. Among them, the Wall Street Journal reporter Evan Gershkovich. Will Grant reports from Andrews Airways.
As the 3 American prisoners stepped back onto US soil, it marked the end of their ordeal in Russia and the defining moment of the biggest prisoner swap since the Cold War. Evan Gershkovich had spent 500 days in a Russian prison, Paul Whelan 5 years, and all three were visibly elated to return to their families. Waiting to greet them on the tarmac at Andrews Air Base was President Biden and Vice President Harris. Both stand to gain politically from having achieved this most complex of diplomatic feats. That this prisoner swap was possible is even more remarkable given it came against the backdrop of the war in Ukraine, with relations between Moscow and the West at their lowest ebb in decades.
The Culture Secretary Lisa Nandy has raised concerns about the BBC's investigation into Hugh Edwards in a meeting with the corporation's Director General. Tim Davie has defended the decision not to sack the news presenter, despite knowing last November that he'd been arrested over the most serious category of indecent images of children. Edwards pleaded guilty to 3 charges on Wednesday. These are Mazimbo reports.
A spokesperson for the Culture Secretary said she had raised concerns on a number of points. They include the corporation's own investigations into Hugh Edwards and its handling of licence fee payers' money. Tim Davies said that the police had asked for Edwards' arrest to be kept confidential. He'd also had to take into consideration instances where people had been arrested but not subsequently charged with any offence. The Director General said he was looking at options to try to recover some of Edwards' salary from the last.
Hartlepool linked to the mass stabbing in Southport on Monday. One of the men has also been charged with assaulting an emergency worker. In Aldershot, Hampshire police have released images of 8 people it wants to identify after a violent demonstration, also linked to Monday's attack, in which 3 young girls were killed. Protesters threw objects and shouted racist abuse outside a hotel housing migrants. The PA News Agency says it's found evidence of at least 15 more planned protests advertised online. The government is shelving £1.3 billion of funding promised by the Conservatives for technology and artificial intelligence projects. It includes £800 million for a powerful new supercomputer, as our technology editor Zoe Kleiman reports.
The Department for Science, Innovation and Technology says that the previous government never actually allocated any money for these programmes, which were promised funding less than 12 months ago. The Conservatives said that before the election, the department was heading for an underspend. The decision leaves unclear the future development of a second UK exascale supercomputer, which would be 50 times more powerful than any current machine in Britain. It was due to be housed at Edinburgh University, and a £31 million building for it has already been constructed.
The Hamas political leader Ismail Haniyeh, who was killed during a visit to Iran on Wednesday, is to be buried in the Gulf state of Qatar this morning. Israel is widely suspected of killing him, but hasn't commented publicly. From Doha, our senior international correspondent Ola Geri reports.
Ismail Haniyeh will be buried here in Qatar, which has been his base for years, after prayers in Doha's biggest mosque. His remains were flown here from Tehran. Iran's supreme leader, who prayed over his coffin, vowed that Israel would suffer a harsh punishment. There will be retaliation. The question is how severe, and at what point might the tit for tat escalate beyond control.
The professional tennis career of one of the greatest British sportsmen, Andy Murray, has come to an end at the Paris Olympics. Murray and his doubles partner Dan Evans lost in straight sets in the men's quarterfinals. The former world number 1 was asked after the match if he would start his retirement with a lion.
I have 4 children that are below the age of 8. Lions don't happen anymore, unfortunately. It's early to bed, early rises. They're up 5, 6 in the morning, so I don't know what I'll do tonight. Probably go back to the village, try and find a few pins for my collection. I don't know what the next chapter is going to look like yet. I haven't decided.
That was Andy Murray.
6 minutes past 6. To the weather, Sarah Keaton. This morning, Sarah.
Good morning to you, Justin. Well, the weather's going to be turning gradually cooler and fresher from the northwest over the next couple of days. So we've got a weather front moving its way in, but bumping into high pressure, so the weather won't be changing in a hurry. Now, for all of southern England, through the Midlands, eastern England and northeast England, just a few showers still lingering around the coast of Lincolnshire, around the Wash as well, but those showers will ease away pretty quickly. And then most areas looking dry with some long spells of sunshine Fair weather cloud bubbling up during the afternoon, but it's still quite warm and humid, with temperatures for most between about 25 to 27. We could see 29 again for London and the southeast today. Going to Wales for the northwest of England and eastern Scotland. Dry first thing, and we're going to see some clear spells through the morning, but cloud will increase gradually, and by the afternoon that'll bring a little bit of showery rain, the breeze picking up a little as well. Still reasonably warm though, 20 to 22 degrees. For Northern Ireland, southwest Scotland and northern Scotland, we've already got the front moving in here, so it's going to be quite cloudy. Some showery rain for the Western Isles and parts of Northern Ireland. That will drift its way eastwards through the day. It's also going to be quite windy, especially towards the far northwest, with gusts up to about 40 miles an hour and temperatures 17 to 20 degrees. Overnight, Scotland and Northern Ireland clearer and temperatures down to around 7 to 10, but England and Wales tonight will see the cloud moving in, patchy light rain moving its way eastwards. Still some showers in the south and east tomorrow, brighter and drier in the northwest.
Sarah, thank you. It is 7 minutes past 6. Let's have a look at the papers. And it's worth starting with the American papers because, of course, the news that has been developing over the last few hours, the return of Evan Gershkovich and other hostages out of Russia, safely now back at Andrews Air Force Base in Maryland. And the Wall Street Journal on its front page, Evan, of course, worked for the Wall Street Journal, has many of the details of how he was released. It also has a letter from the Wall Street Journal editor-in-chief Emma Tucker, who we're going to hear from later on in the programme, in which she talks of it being a joyous day for the millions of well-wishers in the US and around the world who stood with Evan Gershkovich and defended the free press. Also, she says it's been an honour to know his family, but she also talks about the difficulties of reporting around the world now and how those difficulties have not been eased necessarily by what has just happened. We know the US government is keenly aware, as we are, she says, the only way to prevent a quickening cycle of arresting innocent people as pawns in cynical geopolitical games is to remove the incentive for Russia and other nations that pursue the same detestable practice. And the Washington Post also has pictures of Evan Gershkovich arriving, being met by President Biden, by Vice President Kamala Harris at Andrews Air Force Base, and saying that actually for the last 2 weeks the Biden administration was confident that it had finally secured that deal to get them released.
Give you a sense of what's going on in some of the UK papers, who obviously for their print editions didn't have the latest pictures of those former hostages being released from planes, but do have the story as the Times does. But the main story elsewhere is not just what's going on in Southport, but also Hugh Edwards. And the Sun got a big picture of Hugh Edwards at the headline, Hugh the Groomer. See full story, pages 2, 3, 4, 5, 7 and 12, gives you a sense of the amount of coverage there. They say Star used fame to prey on young people for 6 years. They talk about how the BBC chief Tim Davie, the Director General, knew arrest was for the most serious abuse pictures. So we're going to be talking with the former boss of the Culture Select Committee in about an hour's time about the question that the BBC may still have to answer. That's something the Times made editorial today. Goes at its headline, Question Time, Hugh Edwards' downfall raises serious concerns about the BBC's internal processes. The national broadcaster must now be transparent as to what it knew and when. Its final paragraph will give you a bit of that. When the Sun first sounded the alarm about Edwards, the first impulse of a string of foolish media grandees was to attempt to discredit the reporting. Though a set of different criminal allegations have led to Edwards' undoing, the spirit of that paper's original story has been vindicated. The BBC must now direct a similarly questioning and critical eye towards its own practices. Just give you one headline on Hugh Edwards from the Mail. Hugh gamed the system, playing the mental health card and using his vast BBC salary to build a legal wall around himself. And then in front of the FT this morning, BOE in First Bank of England in first rate cut for 4 years as confidence on inflation mounts. Careful notch down to 5%. That is the first time interest rates were cut in this country since I think March 2020, since the pandemic. In another world, less busy news week that we needed front pages right across the way.
The time is 11 minutes past 6.
Let's go to Southport and that story there and speak to our correspondent Alison Freeman, because just a few days on from one of the most brutal slaughters in our nation's history, police have now been given a Section 60 order that gives them enhanced powers to stop it. So speak to Alison Freeman. Alison, morning. Just give us a sense, Alison, after a week of unrest and following those appalling killings, what is the situation in Southport now?
I'm actually at the scene next to the street where obviously this terrible event happened. The number of flowers, balloons, messages to these young girls, 3 girls that died, do continue to grow. And there's a really strong sense of community here. We've just been watching people coming out and giving cups of tea to the police officers who've been stationed here for the whole time. Remember, it's all in memory of those 3 girls: Baby King, who's 6, Elsa Dotson Duncan, who's 7, and 9-year-old Elisa Da Silva Aguiar, who all died when they were attending that Taylor Swift concert. Now, yesterday we saw quite an unusual turn of events. The man accused of their murders and attempting to murder 10 other people was actually named. The judge lifted reporting restrictions because he said that was in the public interest. The judge himself said it would help to stop the spread of misinformation, which has led to that violent disorder that you've been talking about that has happened here and across the country in recent days. Tonight, buildings across the northwest, Liverpool, here in Southport itself and beyond, are being encouraged to light up to show the memory of those 3 young girls who died, as well as solidarity with all of those that have been affected by the terrible events that have happened here.
Alison Freeman in Southport, thank you.
30 minutes past 6, the Hamas leader Ismail Haniyeh will be buried today in the Gulf state of Qatar, where he lived. He was killed in Iran on Wednesday. It is assumed by Israel. Let's talk to Paula Guerin, our senior international correspondent in Doha. Tell us what's going to be happening, Paula, and specifically, I suppose, whether this means that the negotiations that have been happening about the hostages are going to carry on or be finished.
Well, on that last point, first, President Biden has said that the killing of Ismail Haniyeh was not helpful in the search for a ceasefire in Gaza. He was speaking after the arrival of the released detainees in the US. Now, what we're expecting here this morning is that funeral prayers will take place in the largest mosque in Doha. After that, the burial of Ismail Haniyeh will take place in a cemetery in the suburbs here. Hamas have said that there will be Arab leaders in attendance. We don't know who they mean by that. There's been no guest list. And we know that Hamas leaders will be receiving condolence calls here in Qatar over the next 2 or 3 days. But of course, the key question while all of this is going on is what next? Because we have now reached a point where we have had this assassination not claimed by Israel, but certainly bearing all of their hallmarks. We have had the Iranians promise a harsh retaliation. That was said by the supreme leader, Ali Khamenei, who prayed over the coffin of Ismail Haniyeh in Tehran, and you saw those huge scenes of grief and adulation, and the body of Ismail Haniyeh being driven through the streets, his coffin paraded through Tehran. What we are waiting to see is how severe the Iranian response will be and what that will then precipitate from the Israelis, because we are in this tit-for-tat cycle, and the question is, at what point do these carefully calibrated responses tip into something that escalates out of control?
But is it fair to say, one, that Iran doesn't want a regional war, and two, that this is a reminder of Israel's power when you look at the ingenuity, actually, of how it was that they got to kill it?
It's certainly a demonstration of Israel's power, acutely so. He was killed inside a guest house used by dignitaries inside Iran's security belt, effectively on Iranian soil in the capital, just a few hours after he met the supreme leader. He had traveled to Tehran to take part in the inauguration of the new president and had been front and center at that. And we understand from reporting in the New York Times, which hasn't been confirmed, that the killing was actually engineered with a device that was placed inside that guest house some time before, which was detonated previously. Now that raises all sorts of questions for the Iranian regime. How did somebody manage to get inside that building, if that's indeed what happened, to plant a suspect device which sat there undiscovered for possibly weeks, possibly longer, which could then be triggered at 2 o'clock in the morning, killing Ismail Haniyeh and his bodyguard, but not killing or indeed injuring the people who were in the room next door. A very specific very high-profile target, a very clear message to Iran. We can, and indeed to all of Israel's enemies, we can reach you wherever you are. So that message has been heard and understood. The Iranian leader has referred to the fact that our dear guest was killed on Iranian soil. There is no doubt that the Iranians have to respond and have to respond in a way that they have not done so far. It's understood that this has to be a step up from what we've already seen. And you will remember back in April we had 300 cruise and ballistic missiles being fired by the Iranians towards Israel. Most were intercepted, but that followed a previous assassination. So the region waits, and I would say with a great deal of anxiety.
Thank you very much for talking to us this morning.
17 minutes past 6, I mentioned the interest rate cut to the Bank of England's cut its base rate. It's the first time in 4 years. Big economic and business implications. And Felicity is here with that and the rest of the business news. Morning, Felicity.
Morning. Yes, it's certainly been a while since this kind of interest rate story. This is the first rate cut since the onset of the pandemic in March 2020, when the bank's Monetary Policy Committee dropped the rate from its then 16-year high of 5.25%, dropped it down to 5%. This new drop, it's caused some relief for businesses and for borrowers. We should say a lot of mortgages are fixed. That benefit won't be felt straight away. What will it mean, though, for the wider economy? Well, let's ask Anna Andrada, economist at Bloomberg and former member of the Bank of England's Global Forecast team. Anna, good morning.
Morning.
So Andrew Bailey, the Bank of England's governor, said this was an important moment in time. Is it?
Yeah, I think it is, but I also think we need to sort of put yesterday's decision into context. So what we saw yesterday was a very cautious cut from the BOE, and I think it essentially signaled that it had seen enough progress on inflation to cut, but actually the wider war on inflation hadn't been won yet. And I think there were several sort of signs across the minutes and definitely in the tone of Andrew Bailey and the MPC that sort of revealed that hawkishness. We had a very tight vote split, so we had only 5 members of the MPC moving for a cut and the rest 4 backing to keep rates unchanged. We also had a new judgment introduced to the forecast, so the MPC now sort of thinks that the risks to inflation over the medium term are tilted to the upside. And then we had the policymakers that backed the cut, some within that group even think that the decision was finally bounced because they're not convinced about the data, fully convinced yet about the data so far. So I think what the BOE is trying to tell us is that it's in no rush to cut rates again, and we actually expect the next move down to only come in November.
Now, in the recent past, the bank has been accused of being too slow to raise rates in response to rising inflation, with inflation back to the 2% target in the most recent numbers. Is there a chance this cut could be too little too late?
I think it's very hard to sort of strike the balance, and I think that's sort of what you saw yesterday in the vote split, because on the one hand you have the camp that's favoring rate cuts, that's exactly saying what you just said, that look, headline inflation is at target, and they sort of trust the economic framework, let's say, that guides inflation dynamics. So they think that because inflation is at target, then that will feed through inflation expectations, which we are sort of already seeing, and that itself will feed through pay demands, and ultimately services inflation will fall. But then there's the other group that actually doesn't put so much weight on the fact that headline inflation is at target and looks more at the level of services inflation, which is actually, it is still too strong, and they actually think that it's saying something about the economy, the state of the economy right now, and about how sticky it is, how sticky inflation is to remain over the medium term. So I think those are sort of the discussion.
So that's what might be being thought behind the scenes behind these decisions. What impact, though, will this reduction have? Because as I said, a lot of people's mortgages are fixed. They're not going to feel that benefit in their pockets anytime soon.
Yeah, so that's exactly right. So yesterday's cut is now sort of the game changer. The impact of that won't have a major impact on the economy. But the story of 2024 and of 2025 of Britain's economy will be one of a cyclical upswing that is supported by sort of falling interest rate expectations. So what matters for the economy, as I said, and as you said, is not the rate cut yesterday, but it's sort of the market path for rates. And because interest rate expectations have been falling compared to last year and sort of will continue to fall further ahead, then that means that there will be sort of a support for the economy. But it's also important, I think, to keep in mind that it will be sort of a cyclical support. So it's the fact that we're going to grow. We're growing very fast now. In fact, we'll continue to grow next year over the remaining of this year and the next. Doesn't really tell us anything about sort of what's the sustainable growth rate in the economy in the medium term.
Anna Andrada, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Now, listening to that is Lucy Coutts, Investment Director and Head of JM Finn's York office. Lucy, good morning.
Good morning.
How did the markets react to the announcement? Not with much of a fanfare.
Indeed, not much. I think really it was expected. I think it was pretty well flagged in July that we wouldn't have one sort of quite so soon in August, and so we literally expected this. Although obviously it was a tight decision, and then we've seen the pound initially fell quite sharply, but then it recovered somewhat, and the sort of short end of the bond market again fairly muted response. So I think it's on a path to an expected path.
Okay, let's talk about the fashion powerhouse next. Knocked the numbers out of the park in its second quarter. Full price sales climbed 3.2% year on year. And Next had done what Next often does, doesn't it? It had forecast something a lot worse. It had forecast a decline of 0.3%, and its outcome beat its expectations by 42 million. It often underpromises and overdelivers. So were you surprised by the results?
I was actually. I mean, they were much better than we'd expected, and it's a clear winner in a very polarised retail sector where the consumer is hugely sensitive to interest rates. So this is really good news. But the main crux of its beating expectations is its online offering, because actually the footfall in its stores has actually been only at 0.4%. So most of that growth has come from its online offering.
Apple also had a very good night. It's reported a better than expected quarter. Revenues up 5% in the 3 months to the end of June. Very, very good numbers. Net sales at $85.8 billion. One number might worry them, and it's the sales of iPhones. That fell to the lowest level in 3 years. Do you think investors are a bit anxious about that?
The iPhone is its sort of benchmark product, and we are hugely sensitive to it. But we await the next iteration in September, which will have embedded its own Apple Intelligence, its AI feature in its new operating software. And I think that's really what the consumer is waiting for. But again, Apple just delivers on its services and on its products, and whereas the iPhone is a bit weak, the iPad is doing very, very well. So good news from Apple.
There's a lot of high-tech eggs in different baskets. Well, the chip maker Intel not having such a good time. It's seen its share price drop by 20% after it made an announcement that it was cutting 15,000 jobs. That is around 15% of its workforce. Why, when we hear about chip makers like Nvidia being so popular, is Intel struggling?
Well, it's a turnaround story, and it's really found it hard to compete with, particularly Taiwan Semiconductor. And the promise and the hope is really that you're going to have a US supply manufacturer from Intel, but it's really having to pull back on spending on its data centers, and it's struggling to take market share from other providers. So it's a real shock to the market.
Lucy Coutts, thank you very much indeed. Now, Amazon also had second quarter results out in the last few hours. Very interesting results, very interesting market reaction. Net sales increased 10% to $148 billion in the second quarter. The reaction was not as good. Doug Gurr ran Amazon in the UK from 2016 to 2020 and is now director of the Natural History Museum. Doug, that must feel like a very refreshing change. Good morning.
Good morning, and thank you very much for having me back again.
Thank you for being with us. But explain these numbers to me then, because sales up 10%, and yet its shares fell by as much as 8% in after-hours trading.
Yeah, I mean, at one level you'd say this is actually a pretty impressive set of numbers. As you say, sales up 10% on the size of the organisation, that's quite something. Operating profits nearly doubled. There was a little bit of dip on the shares. I think that was primarily down to the guidance. They were saying I think the next quarter was going to be slightly softer, not so much on sales, but actually on the operating profit. And I think that's a consequence of some heavy investments. They try and build out both the cloud computing side of the business, particularly looking at those AI opportunities, and obviously continuing to invest in the sort of core retail side of the business.
Yeah, and like a lot of other big tech companies, it is spending an absolutely vast amount of cash on AI technology. Do you think investors are worried about whether that's actually going to pay off?
I mean, I think again, look, I mean, you've got much better rates to investors than I have. But actually, what's interesting, what really jumped out to me from these results is probably three things. As you say, AWS, which is the cloud compute division, actually produced some very strong numbers. I think its growth returned to 19%, which is the strongest it's been for quite a while, and that was very much because driven by the adoption of cloud, in particular by lots of businesses looking to really get into these AI tools. So you've got AXA, you've got DoorDash, you've got WPP, and even closer to home, we've got AWS supporting the data ecosystem here at the museum. So there's a lot of AI adoption, and clearly they're in a phase where they say let's invest to get behind that. But actually also what was interesting beyond the AI, if you look at in the core retail, really interesting to see the call outs on that old sort of retail holy trinity of price, selection, convenience. So I think they called out the fastest speed for Prime members ever in this first half of the year. It was a Prime Day, it was called out the biggest ever, but also growing selection. So I think they're investing hard in those areas, and obviously that's a question of how quickly do the returns come. I suspect they're quite confident the returns will come, or they would be investing. But then the other one that was really just didn't get quite so much attention, but I was actually quite struck by the focus on some of the sustainability initiatives. I think they called out that 100% of all of the electricity, including for those data centers, is now matched by renewables. There was an interesting point that they've taken out, I think, 95% of the plastic packaging in North American operations. That's actually following up from something that happened a couple of years ago in Europe. And again, even closer to home, it's been great to see AWS getting behind the science and learning activity of the amazing New Gardens and Natural History Museum. So it's a lot of investments, and as ever, I think Amazon has a pretty good long-term track record of getting return on that investment. So we shall see.
Oh yeah, I don't think anyone's counting it out just yet. Doug, who ran Amazon in the UK from 2016 to 2020, thank you very much.
Thank you. 29 minutes past 6 to Sport and Gary. Good morning. So it's the end of the road for Andy Murray. Evans to return on this occasion. Forehand return.
It's gone long. It's all over. The match is over. Fritz and Paul win, but the career is over as well. If we take Andy Murray at his word, that is that. And there is a strange atmosphere around Court Suzanne Longman as one of the great British sporting careers comes to an end.
It's Andy Murray and the quarterfinal to the American players Taylor Fritz and Tommy Paul. 6-2, 6-4 the score. To an end of his tennis career.
We lost two top players today, Tony and Taylor. We would have had to play very well to win that match, and we didn't play a particularly good match, certainly from my side. We got into the end, and we could have found that form earlier. We could have caused some problems, but it wasn't to be. And we got through some tricky situations in the first couple of matches. Could have easily lost them. We did well to make the quarters, but disappointing. If you get through that match today, get an opportunity to win a medal, and wasn't to be.
The ball on Andy Murray throughout this morning's rowing. Among other highlights in the rowing, the women's four won a silver medal. The British team were just pipped to the post by Netherlands. Helen Glover summed up their day.
I think the thing that I've learned is the most frustrating thing is to look back and find things you could do differently. And I think today we put it all out there. We raced the plan we wanted to race. We raced together with so much heart, and you know what? I think there can't be regret in looking back and knowing you've done all you can.
Simone Biles won the all-round gymnastic title for her second gold medal in Paris and her sixth Olympic gold overall. Today, the athletic competition gets underway and will focus on Kiwi Hodgkinson, the big medal hope in the 800 metres. Sad news to report this morning. The former Leicester City manager Craig Shakespeare has died. He was assistant coach at the club when they won the Premier League 8 years ago. Craig Shakespeare was 60. Here are the racing tips for the big meeting at Goodwood at 3 o'clock. Number 12, look out for a horse called Classic. 3:35, number 5, Living the Dream.
Gary, thank you very much indeed.
to this question: could you survive 7 days without a smartphone?
Earlier this year, a group of teenagers gave up their smartphones.
No, I can't cope with it. It's like having like a comfort iron.
Now it's the adults' turn. Did they cope any better?
If I'm lying in bed, I won't pick up a book, I'll pick up a phone because it just feels a bit easier.
Ask my parents, that's what it was like with that mobile phone. So they just say they used to get lost a lot and just sort of wander around. I don't think it was very easy for them.
Living without our smartphones, the adults' turn. Me, Rachel Byrne.
It's just been a pain, it's been a struggle, I think. Everything's an inconvenience.
Radio 4 and BBC Sounds. This Sunday lunchtime at 1:30.
So now it's 28 minutes to 7. You're listening to Today Radio 4.
President Biden has said trust between the US and its allies was key to the largest prisoner swap between the West and Russia since the Cold War. 26 people, including 2 children from 6 different countries, travelled home overnight after an exchange in Turkey. In the last few hours, 3 US citizens landed in Maryland, including the Wall Street Journal reporter Evan Gershkovich. The Culture Secretary Lisa Nandy has raised concerns about the BBC's investigation into Hugh Edwards in a meeting with the corporation's Director General. Tim Davie has defended the decision not to sack the news presenter, despite knowing last November that he'd been arrested over the most serious category of indecent images of children. 7 men have been charged with violent disorder after a riot broke out in Hartlepool, linked to the mass stabbing in Southport on Monday. One of the men has also been charged with assaulting an emergency worker. The government is shelving £1.3 billion of funding promised by the Conservatives for technology and artificial intelligence projects, including a powerful new supercomputer. The Science, Innovation and Technology says that the previous government never allocated any money. The Tories said that before the election the department was heading for a Hamas political leader Ismail Haniyeh, who was killed during a visit to Iran on Wednesday, is to be buried in the Gulf state of Qatar this morning. At a funeral ceremony in Tehran, Iran's supreme leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei vowed that Israel will suffer a harsh punishment. Israel is widely suspected of killing him. Conservative leadership candidate Robert Jenrick will tell his party that he can win the next general election when he launches his campaign in his new constituency in Nottinghamshire this afternoon. Mr Jenrick will say the Tories have a mountain to climb and show that they have changed. And researchers say that a half-billion-year-old fossil of a spiny slug can shed light on the origins of animals such as oysters and octopuses. The shellless, thumb-sized creature lived on the seafloor at a time when very early forms of most major animal groups were starting to emerge.
Thank you. Just to 25 to 7, the biggest prisoner swap since the Cold War. The Russians giving up hostages and getting in return, well, a hitman and some spies as well. President Biden meeting 3 of the freed prisoners as they touch down on American soil just before 5 a.m. our time.
This is about the essence of who we are as a country. It really is about personal nation. It's about family. It's about being able to have access to your own people you love and your poor. Imagine being sent to prison. How long will ever be home? What's going on with children? They go to bed at night time. They go to night every day. It matters.
More from the US side. There's Jim Foster. Let's talk to Steve Rosenberg, the Russia editor, who's on the line. For Putin, also meeting people off the plane, and what, Steve, in terms of what he's saying and what this brings for him?
Yeah, it's really interesting. All sides involved in this will play the win here. Joe Biden's reaction, saying it's the diplomacy, the Chancellor says but the reality is, Moscow used this as its vision. It wanted those nations, including number 1, the Russians, and it used because back in February, President Putin dropped this very hard and very unsubtle hint that this Russian hit was the email he wanted released from Joe Biden. And I think to understand exactly how Russia used this to all we need to do is watch those extraordinary scenes of Moscow's political death last night, which was shown live actually on the state control building news channel, when this Russian contingent of spies, cyber agents, and the convicted assassin arrived through big red carpet on the tarmac, guard of honor, and the president there to meet the Russians as they go for the case of flowers. They will promise speed towards and he said, congratulations on your return to the motherland. He said to those of you who are in the military, thank you for your loyalty to the earth.
Is it being made clear to the Russian people the nature of the swap?
Yes, I mean, I've got the Russian government report to me this morning's edition, and it lists who Russia gave up, who Russia released from Russian jails, including criminal dissidents. But the headline is, we brought our guys back. And I think that is the point that is going to be pressed over the next few days in the state media here. The Kremlin to show the Russian people that it is concerned about bringing people it considers to be Russian patriots back to the country.
Stephen Rosenberg, thank you.
23 minutes to 7, the Culture Secretary, Lisa Nandy, has issued a statement for a meeting with the boss of the BBC about its handling of very serious allegations against Hugh Edwards. Harry Farley, our political correspondent, is in Westminster. Harry, morning. In all frankness, there wasn't a huge amount, was there, Harry, in this statement from Lisa Nandy? It's sort of about the atmospherics around this story, and the atmospherics suggest the BBC is still under quite considerable pressure.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Lisa Nandy saying she's shocked by Hugh Edwards' abhorrent actions, and she says that in that meeting, which was a phone call with the Director General, BBC's Director General Tim Davie, she said she raised a number of concerns, including the BBC's investigation and the handling of it into Hugh Edwards, and also particularly what she says the handling of licence fee payers' money. I understand that following those talks, that conversation yesterday with Tim Davie, Lisa Nandy remains concerned at the BBC's decisions and believes there is a clear risk that the current position damages trust in the BBC. And chief among those decisions by the BBC was the one to continue employing and paying Hugh Edwards after the BBC found out about his arrest last November and that he was arrested over the most serious category of child abuse images. I understand Miss Nandy raised particular questions around Hugh Edwards' pension and that he continued to receive that after his arrest. Tim Davie, the Director General, for his part, said it was a difficult decision to continue employing and paying Hugh Edwards after that arrest. But chief among the reasons behind it was the police had asked him to keep it confidential. And on that question that Lisa Nandy raised about Hugh Edwards' pension, he says it's very difficult, nigh on impossible to claw back. And when it comes to Edwards' paying, clawing some of that back, he said it's legally challenging, but we'll look at all the options.
Harry Farley in Westminster, thank you very much.
21 minutes to 7 is the time. It's papers and the biggest prisoner exchange since the Cold War is on the front pages of quite a few of them, certainly of the digital editions, but actually the Times paper edition in front of me also has it. Times, of course, the sister paper of the Wall Street Journal, and
Plenty of Hugh Edwards in the papers. The Sun has a big picture of Hugh Edwards with the headline Hugh the Groomer, BBC Chief new arrest was for most serious abuse pics are used for aim to prey on young people for 6 years. Full story, see pages 2, 3, 4, 5, 7 and 12 as you said. Pressure on that story from the Sun, the Times, the sister paper too. The Sun has a lead editorial saying there are still lots of questions for the BBC to answer. Well, give you a sense of some other stories. As I said, at 6:10, there's a world in which has not been so busy with news this week. The interest rate cut, for the first time in 4 years, will be on all front pages. As it is, it's on the front of the FT, BOE, Big Bank of England, first rate cut for 4 years. It's confidence on inflation mounts. The I front page, interest rate cut too late to stop budget squeeze. Chancellor Rachel Reeves to push on with tax rises and spending cuts in her October budget, despite the Bank of England delivering its first rate cut since 2020. And just a final thought before you set the newspaper review. Yesterday we talked about how it was the would have been the 100th birthday of the great Sir Frank Worrell, British cricketer. Today would have been the 100th birthday of James Baldwin, the brilliant American novelist. There's a very nice tribute to him on the Economist homepage. It says his work is an appeal to an individual's conscience, a theme also appropriate for the social media age, in which displaying the correct moral stance supersedes the grinding political work of building coalitions across ideological lines.
To him after 8:30. Sport also on obviously the back pages, but also the front pages as well. So goodbye, Andy. Their farewell miracle to Murray's career as it ends in tears, according to The Guardian. But also this boxing match that has caused so much controversy. Women's boxing match on the front page of the Mail. Watching this gruesome mismatch between a woman and a biological male left me fearing the wokery will get someone killed or amongst the Daily Mail's correspondent David Jones. And The Guardian describes the match between the Algerian Imane Khalif and the Italian Angela Carini, in which the first punch dislodged Carini's chin strap, a second smashed against her chin and bloodied her shorts. After multiple punches, she returned to her corner and raised her hand, fell to her knees sobbing, and refused to shake Khalif's hand after the Algerian was declared the winner. And The Guardian also says the UN Special Rapporteur on Violence Against Women and Girls has expressed her concern. Angela Carini rightly followed her instinct, she says, prioritised her physical safety. She and other female athletes should not be exposed to this.
17 minutes to 7, our main headline this morning. President Joe Biden has greeted 3 American detainees on their return to the US from Russia, part of the largest East-West prisoner swap since the Cold War.
Venezuela's banning opposition leader Maria Corina Machado has called for protests across the country to defend what her party sees as its rightful electoral victory. President Maduro has ordered the Supreme Court to take action against the protesters. There have been more than 1,000 arrests already, and called for the opposition leader to be arrested too. From Caracas is our southern correspondent.
The protests were something incredible. Everyone has the internet, Wi-Fi, Instagram, TikTok. Everyone passes on a statement through the neighborhoods of Caracas saying, "Let's march. Let's join together for a good Venezuela." Isabella, not her real name, is one of dozens of families waiting for answers outside this police station in Caracas. The neighborhoods of Caracas began to descend from the mountain. When the Petare zone, they started to go down, shouting with pots, pans, or flags. Barefoot children, mothers carrying children to the march. The armed paramilitaries of Maduro supporters yelled at us, cursed at us, threw stones at us. They called us Viva Maduro. We went out to march. We want a change because we can no longer stand this government. There is so much misery, so much hunger, so much crime, so much injustice towards innocent people. The National Guard grabbed my son unjustly because he was not harming anyone. My son did not have the stones, did not have weapons, he only protested. They beat him. They accused him of being a terrorist for defending their country, for wanting a change. Her son, one of hundreds of people detained in protests against President Maduro. I haven't been able to see him or pass him through. I don't know if he was being beaten. I don't know if he has bathed, if he has eaten, if they have given him food. They don't give me information about anything. They have no evidence of him. Isabella Torres, Chiang is my family, so the others, but we need to protest. We want a future for our children, for our grandchildren, for the entire country. There is so much misery, many people eating in the streets. many people dying on hospitals. I had a granddaughter who died on 6th December last year because there was no oxygen in the hospitals. There were 12 children who died because there was no oxygen. I want Venezuela to be the same as before, where we work with dignity. We earn a decent salary. Our children and grandchildren could study. My daughter, my son left university because there are no teachers. The government doesn't want kids to study. The government wants us to continue in misery, to be ignored. Do not speak out. President Maduro has accused the opposition of starting a coup by disputing the election results and has denied the electoral fraud they're accusing him of.
This is all directed by a perverse acabador that has to take responsibility. Edmundo Gonzalez and Maria Corina Machado. It's not just criminal because of the violence, but because they look for criminals to attack their own people.
Government's critics don't want to stop their protest. The fear of what will happen if they do is growing. We are tired. When the votes took place, he had to realize that he lost. The people got tired.
Early Wells reporting. It's 12 minutes to 7, and it is deadline day today for applications to be manager of England's men's football team, taking over from Gareth Southgate after he stepped down at the Euros or Euro Championships. We asked some friends of the Today programme what they might bring to the table. Later we're going to hear from classicist Mary Beard and comedian Josh Widdicombe. But first up, it's Matthew Syed, former international table tennis player, presenter of Sideways on Radio 4 and also Time Please.
I love the sympathise, they're so